Everyone laughed when a struggling single mother inherited nothing but a hill of dirt, until she started digging. What she uncovered beneath the earth changed her life, her town, and history itself. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe, leave a like, and comment where you're watching from, because today's story will prove that hope can't stay buried forever. The morning Sarah Coleman received the letter, the world felt as heavy as the gray sky pressing against her window. Bills cluttered the table, the refrigerator hummed in defiance of an empty pantry, and her daughter Emma sat quietly coloring with a stub of a pink crayon. Sarah had been counting coins for rent, whispering prayers that never seemed to reach anyone listening. When the mailman's knock came, it startled her. Letters usually brought only more bad news. The envelope was thick, embossed with gold lettering from a law firm in Charleston. For a moment, she imagined something impossible, a forgotten refund, a miracle check, anything that could keep the lights on for another week. She broke the seal with trembling fingers. The words blurred as she read them. Her great-aunt Millicent, a relative she'd never met, had passed away and left her something. Her heart skipped. An inheritance. But as she read further, confusion set in. The document didn't mention money, jewelry, or property she could live in. It said she had inherited a house, one that had been buried under a mudslide a century ago. A buried house. The letter described it as a geological feature more than a residence. Sarah let out a weak laugh. It felt like the universe was mocking her. She imagined herself standing over a mound of earth with a for sale sign, trying to convince someone there was a mansion underneath. The attached note from the lawyers didn't help. "Miss Coleman, you may refuse this inheritance to avoid property taxes." The implication was clear. They thought she would. She called them anyway. "I'm accepting it," she said, her voice steady despite her shaking hands. On the other end, the lawyer hesitated. "Miss Coleman, it's not exactly livable. The property was buried in the 1924 mudslide. There's nothing to see but dirt." "Then I'll start digging," Sarah replied, and hung up before she could lose her nerve. 3 days later, she stood with her daughter at the edge of the inherited land in rural North Carolina. The air was crisp, the hill before them covered in wild grass and scattered trees. From a distance it looked like any other slope, but Sarah felt something beneath her feet, a pulse, maybe imagination, but real enough to keep her rooted. "Mama," Emma asked softly, clutching her hand. "Where's the house?" Sarah knelt beside her. "Sleeping under there," she said, pointing at the hill, "like a treasure waiting to be found. Can we wake it up?" Sarah smiled. "Yeah, baby, we'll wake it up." That night she borrowed 2 shovels from Marcus, the owner of the hardware store where she worked weekends. When he handed them to her, he gave her a look somewhere between pity and disbelief. "You really think there's a house under that hill?" "I think there's something worth digging for," she said simply. By morning, the town already knew. Gossip moved faster than wildfire in small places like Ashbury Hollow. "Did you hear about Sarah Coleman? She's digging for a house that doesn't exist." Some laughed. Others pitied her. When Sarah drove her old truck out to the property that evening, she saw headlights slowing as cars passed, people rolling down their windows to take photos. The humiliation burned, but she kept her focus on the dirt in front of her. She pushed the first shovel into the ground. The soil was dense, damp with memory. Each scoop felt like rebellion against the laughter, against the despair that had followed her since her husband left 2 years ago. The muscles in her arms screamed, but she kept digging. When she grew too tired, Emma took her plastic beach pail and began to help, filling it with handfuls of dirt. "Good job, baby," Sarah whispered. "Every little bit counts." After 3 days, the only visible change was a shallow dent in the hill and the bruises forming on her palms. Still, She returned every night. She no longer cared who saw. Each shovelful was proof she hadn't given up. On the 5th day, as she rested against the truck, headlights approached and stopped. Miss Patricia, Emma's teacher, stepped out wearing work gloves. "Heard you could use an extra set of hands," she said, and behind her came her teenage son with a flashlight. They dug beside her without a word. For the first time in weeks, Sarah didn't feel alone. The next evening, Marcus himself showed up with a wheelbarrow. Then came the church youth group, curious neighbors, and even people who'd once mocked her. By the end of the 2nd week, the hill looked like a construction site. The laughter had turned into murmurs of awe. Reporters came, calling her the woman who wouldn't quit. Sarah didn't talk to them. She just kept digging. One dusky evening, as the sun bled into the tree line, her shovel struck something hard. The metallic clang echoed through the air. Sarah froze, heart pounding. She fell to her knees and brushed the dirt away with her bare hands. Copper, smooth and cold. Her breath caught. "I found it," she whispered, voice trembling. Then louder to the crowd gathering above, "I found it!" Cheers erupted around her. Emma squealed with delight, waving her little hands. People clapped, hugged, shouted, but Sarah barely heard them. She pressed her palm against the metal roof beneath the earth, feeling its cool certainty. It was real. The buried house was real. As night fell, Sarah stood at the edge of the excavation pit, dirt streaking her face, hair wild, exhaustion etched into her bones. But her eyes shone with something new. For the first time in years, she wasn't surviving. She was fighting for something bigger. She looked down at the faint outline of the house under the earth and whispered, "We're waking you up." And though the night was silent, she could almost swear the ground whispered back. By the 3rd week, the hole in the hill was no longer just a hole. It was a wound in the earth, wide enough for 3 people to stand shoulder to shoulder, and deep enough that Sarah had to climb out using her hands and knees. What had started as a rumor had become a spectacle. Cars slowed every evening, lining the narrow dirt road like it was a parade route. People leaned out of windows with their phones, recording her like she was a sideshow. Someone had uploaded a picture of her on Facebook with the caption, "Local woman tries to dig up a house with a shovel, sends help." There were laughing emojis under it, a lot of them. She saw it because someone at work showed her. She didn't react. She just said, "My break's over," and went back to the register. But she felt it. God, she felt it. "You're a joke. You're desperate. You're embarrassing yourself." That voice had lived in her head for years, long before the hill. It sounded like her ex-husband. It sounded like her own mother. It sounded like the world. And she was tired of letting it be right. So she kept digging. Every day after Emma got out of school, they drove straight to the site with the shovels in the back of the truck, plus sandwiches wrapped in paper towels. Emma did her homework in the truck cab first, legs kicked up on the dashboard, tongue between her teeth like she always did when she concentrated. Then, when it started to cool in the evenings, she came down into the pit with her mother. Sometimes Emma hummed to herself while she worked, and sometimes she talked to the hill like it could hear her. "Hello, house. We're still here." "Don't worry. We're going to get you out." Oh, one night when the air smelled like pine sap and damp clay, Emma leaned against Sarah's leg and said, "Mama, when we find the door, can I open it first?" Sarah smiled, though her shoulders ached so badly she thought they might split. "If there's a door, baby, it's yours." "There is," Emma said softly. Simple as fact. That certainty kept Sarah going. But not everyone who showed up came to help. A white SUV rolled up on a Tuesday at dusk and stopped close enough that its headlights flooded the dig site like a stage. 3 women sat inside. Sarah had seen them at the grocery store where she stocked shelves at night. The kind of women who only ever bought organic fruit and complained loudly about prices in front of her like she controlled them. The passenger window slid down. "So," one of them said, sipping something from a stainless cup, "you building a swimming pool?" The others laughed. Sarah didn't answer. She just drove her shovel into the ground and lifted. "Mama," Emma whispered. "Keep working," Sarah whispered back. Another voice called out, "Hear you inherited a pile of dirt. People really do get everything these days." That one stung, and not because of what was said, but how. The way people slid out of that woman's mouth. Like you people, like your kind. Sarah had heard that tone before too. She knew exactly what it meant. She didn't rise to it. She couldn't afford to. The SUV stayed for a few minutes longer, watching like it was entertainment, then pulled away. Gravel crackled under the tires. When they were alone again, Emma asked quietly, "Why are they mean?" Sarah wiped her forehead with the back of her arm, leaving a streak of mud across her temple. "Because some folks only feel tall when someone else is on their knees," she said. "Now pass me that bucket." That was how they handled it. Not with speeches, with work. The first person who wasn't family and wasn't pity to climb into the pit and work like it mattered was Miss Patricia. Miss Patricia was one of those teachers who didn't just hand you a worksheet and tell you to be quiet. She noticed things. She noticed that Emma sometimes pretended she wasn't hungry at lunch. She noticed that Emma flinched when anyone joked about poor kids. She noticed that Emma, who almost never spoke in class, would talk for 20 straight minutes about the history of trains. So when Miss Patricia showed up wearing jeans and an old hoodie, with her teenage son Nate behind her carrying a second pair of work gloves, Sarah nearly cried. "I thought you said you don't get off work until 6, Sarah said. "I told Linda to cover," Miss Patricia said. "I said it was important." Nate slid down into the pit. "Where do you want me?" Sarah blinked. It was such a simple sentence, and no one had asked her that in a long time. She swallowed. "Start clearing along that wall. We're trying to go wide, not just deep. If this really was a house, we'll hit edges sooner than we hit the floor." Miss Patricia let out a low whistle. "Look at you, excavation plan and everything." "I watched a video," Sarah muttered. "Yeah?" Miss Patricia smiled. "Well, now you've got a crew." They dug for 2 hours under cheap work lamps clipped to the truck's hood. Nate worked fast and quiet. Miss Patricia worked like she had something to prove. Sarah worked like she'd die if she stopped. In that time, they moved more dirt than Sarah had done alone in 3 days. When they finally paused, breathless, Sarah looked at the slope of exposed earth and felt something new bloom in her chest. Not hope yet, but structure. Possibility. "You don't have to keep doing this," she told Miss Patricia. "People are talking. They're saying I've lost it." "People always talk," Miss Patricia said. "Most of them never pick up a shovel. That's the difference." After that night, the line between Sarah's project and the town's curiosity began to blur. On Thursday, Marcus from the hardware store arrived with a wheelbarrow and 2 sets of knee pads. "Don't make this weird," he said when she opened her mouth. "Just take 'em." On Friday, 2 kids from the church youth group came by and asked if this counted as volunteer hours. Sarah said yes. She wasn't sure it did, but she figured God could deal with the paperwork later. On Saturday, Bobby Williams from the local construction company drove up in a beat-up truck with a generator and a work light and said, "Figured you shouldn't be out here in the dark without proper lighting. Liability and all." "Bobby," Sarah said, "I can't pay you." "Didn't ask you to," he said. "Besides, my guys are only getting half weeks right now anyway. Work's slow. Figured this keeps us loose." That was the truth of Ashbury Hollow. The mill had shut down 6 years ago. Most of the factories that used to keep the town breathing were gone. People were barely making rent. Everyone knew someone on the edge. People understood desperation here. Some of them pretended they didn't, because pretending felt cleaner. Some of them remembered. By the end of the second week, the pit was surrounded by orange safety fencing and full of bodies. Some were there to help, sweating beside her with dirt on their faces. Some were there to watch, leaning on their cars with folded arms, whispering. Then came day 23. That was the day the sound happened. It was almost sunset. The air had that copper taste it gets before the night settles in the trees. Sarah was in the pit, waist deep in earth, every muscle numb and shaking. Her hands were raw under cheap gloves, blisters split open and taped over twice. Emma sat above her at the edge, kicking her legs, talking softly to keep her mother's mind from the pain. "And when we find the kitchen, I hope there's a stove, a pretty one, with those little twisty knobs, because then we could make pancakes here and—" Clang. Sarah stopped. Her shovel had hit something that wasn't dirt. For a frozen second, no one moved. The air felt like it held its breath. Then she dug again, faster now, adrenaline making her reckless. Clang, clang, clang. Her shovel was striking metal, not junk metal, not trash. Broad, smooth, solid. "Flashlight," she gasped. Nate dropped into the pit and snapped one on, angling it toward where Sarah was clearing fast with her hands now, throwing clumps of earth behind her. Her fingers met something cool. It wasn't a pipe. It wasn't junk. It was a surface, wide, flat, angled, not a roof shingle, not stone, copper. Her heart slammed so hard it almost hurt. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Oh my God, oh my God." "What is it?" Emma called, voice pitching high with excitement. Sarah didn't answer. She couldn't. Her throat had closed. Instead, she brushed more away, wiping greasy dirt off with the sleeve of her shirt until the light caught and flashed. Under a century of earth, there it was, copper gone green at the edges, like skin touched by time, but intact. It wasn't a myth. The house was real. "Marcus!" Nate yelled. "Get down here!" "What?" Marcus leaned over the edge, squinting. "You find piping?" "Not pipe," Nate shot back. "Roof." People moved in then. Fast. Word spread even faster than before. Phones came out. Voices layered over each other, excitement and shock and disbelief all tangled together. Sarah didn't notice any of it. All she saw was that copper. All she felt was the way her pulse synced with it. She pressed her palm flat against the metal and closed her eyes. "You existed." She didn't realize she'd said it out loud until Emma whispered back, "Told you." Someone started clapping. Someone else shouted, "She did it." A cheer rose around the pit, messy and bright, the kind of sound that vibrated in bone. But beneath the noise, Sarah felt something else. Responsibility. Because now it wasn't just her. Now that copper roof didn't belong to just a desperate woman with a shovel. It belonged to a town. And a town had showed up. That night people stayed long after dark, setting up floodlights and folding chairs like it was a football game. Coffee appeared, then sandwiches, then blankets for Emma when she started to yawn. Miss Patricia took Emma to sit in the truck and wrapped her in her own jacket. "Your mama's busy making history," she whispered to the sleepy girl. "You can tell them that at school." Sarah climbed out of the pit only when Marcus physically reached down, grabbed her forearm and hauled her up. "You're done for tonight," he said. "I can't stop now," she protested, breathless, hair stuck to her face. "You can, and you are," he said. "You pass out in there, you're no good to anybody." She hated that he was right. She sat on the back bumper of her truck, chest heaving, hands shaking, light from the work lamps painting the dirt on her skin into hard shadows. She looked at the hill. not just a hill anymore, and felt something growing inside her that she hadn't felt in a very long time. Not anger, not fear. Claim. For years, life had been happening to her. Rent was due, hours got cut. Emma needed shoes, tires blew, men left, promises broke. She reacted, she endured. But this she had taken. This she had dug out of the earth herself. Emma climbed into her lap, half asleep, still warm from the truck cab. "Mama?" she mumbled into Sarah's shoulder. "Yeah, baby?" "When we move in, can my room be the one with the window that faces the sun?" Sarah let out a soft, stunned laugh and pressed her cheek to the top of her daughter's head. "Yeah," she whispered. "Yeah, baby. It can." She stayed there like that, holding her child, staring at the copper line peeking through the dirt like the edge of a buried crown. But not everyone who came that night came to celebrate. A black Mercedes eased up around 11, purring instead of rattling like most of the trucks that showed up here. The door opened and Thomas Garrett stepped out. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. Garrett owned half the commercial property in town, the strip mall with the pharmacy, most of Main Street, even the broken-down warehouse by the river. He wore pressed shirts and carried himself like the rules bent around him. He'd always talked to Sarah like she should be grateful he was talking to her at all. Now he smiled like a man arriving at an auction. "Miss Coleman," he said smoothly, hands in his pockets as he surveyed the scene. "Well, you've certainly made a stir." Marcus bristled. Miss Patricia's eyes narrowed, but Garrett only looked at Sarah like the others weren't there. "I heard," he continued, "that what you've uncovered may have some historical value, and I thought, given the complexity of managing such things, you might appreciate some guidance." Sarah stared at him. She could still feel Emma's weight against her ribs. Her body still ached from the day's work. Dirt flaked from her eyelashes when she blinked. She was so tired she could barely feel her feet. "Guidance," she repeated quietly. "Yes. Wealth, heritage holdings, restoration. That kind of work requires capital, connections, legal navigation. I'd hate to see you lose something so promising due to inexperience." Inexperience, like she hadn't just spent 3 weeks in a hole doing the impossible. Sarah let the silence hang just long enough to make him shift. Finally, she said, level and calm, "We're good." Garrett smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Are you sure? This kind of opportunity rarely comes twice." Sarah's jaw set. "I didn't get this because of you," she said, "and I won't lose it because of you." Marcus made a low, approving sound in his throat. Garrett's smile thinned. "I'll be in touch," he said, which everyone in town knew meant, "I'm not done." He walked back to his car and drove off without offering to lift so much as a shovel. When he was gone, Miss Patricia muttered, "Vultures always smell fresh meat first." Sarah didn't respond, but she heard it. She understood. Because it wasn't just a hole in the ground anymore. It was leverage. It was money. It was danger. By midnight, most of the onlookers had gone home, taking with them their photos and their stories. Only a handful remained, the ones who had actually worked. Marcus, Bobby, Miss Patricia, and Nate. 2 of the youth group boys who had fallen asleep sitting up against a stack of sandbags, and Sarah. She looked around at them, tired, muddy, blistered, all of them. People who had their own problems, their own bills, their own families, and still, they had shown up for her. No one had shown up for her in a long, long time. Her throat tightened. "Thank you," she said quietly. Marcus shrugged like it was nothing. "Don't start crying," he said. "If you cry, I'm gonna have to act like I've got dust in my eye, and that's embarrassing." That made her laugh. And that laugh, small, rough, half-broken, felt like a crack of light through a long-closed door. They packed up for the night. Bobby chained off the entrance so nobody could mess with the site while they slept. Miss Patricia hugged her, the kind of hug that said, "You're not crazy and you're not alone." Nate carried Emma to the truck like she weighed nothing. When everyone had gone, Sarah sat behind the wheel for a long moment without starting the engine. Her hands were still shaking. Her heart was still pounding. Her whole life was changing, and it was happening right in front of her. But beneath the adrenaline was something quiet, something steady, something almost holy. "This is real. You were right to try." She looked back toward the hill one last time before she drove off into the dark. The town had come to watch her fail. Instead, they'd watched the ground admit the truth. There really was a house under there. And tomorrow, she thought, gripping the steering wheel, tomorrow we open the door. The morning after the copper roof was exposed, fog hung low over the valley, curling around the trees like breath in the cold. The town that once mocked her now hummed with curiosity. Trucks, cameras, and even reporters arrived before sunrise. Sarah stood at the edge of the pit, boots sinking into the wet earth, feeling as if she were standing between two centuries, one buried, one about to wake up. "Ready?" Marcus asked, stepping up beside her. His clothes were already streaked with mud, his hands calloused from weeks of work. Sarah nodded, though her stomach twisted. "Let's bring it out." By mid-morning, the volunteers had doubled. Bobby Williams arrived with his small construction crew and a rented excavator, a loan from a friend who owed him a favor. The machine roared to life, its bucket digging through a century of compacted mud and clay. Each scoop revealed more of the house, its copper roof shimmering faintly under the layers of grime. And then, as the final slabs of earth fell away, they saw it. A steep gable roof, decorative trim still visible, windows half filled with hardened dirt but unbroken. A house that had been sleeping under the soil since 1924. The onlookers gasped. Someone began to clap. Sarah didn't move. She was afraid that if she blinked, it might vanish. By afternoon, the front of the house was fully exposed, a towering Victorian mansion of faded grandeur, its frame remarkably intact. The mudslide that had buried it had also sealed it off from air, rot, and time. It looked like it had been waiting for her. Emma tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Can we go inside now, Mama?" "Not yet," Sarah whispered. "We have to make sure it's safe." But she couldn't wait long either. That night, with the last of the floodlights buzzing over the site and the volunteers resting on overturned buckets, Sarah and Emma stood before the door. The brass handle was cold, still bearing the carved initials C.A., Cornelius Ashworth. She pushed. The door didn't open. It creaked, resisted, then gave way with a long, groaning sigh, as if exhaling the trapped air of a forgotten world. The smell hit first, old wood, dry earth, and the faint sweetness of dust. The light from her flashlight sliced through the darkness, landing on furniture still in place. A grand piano slanted against a wall, a tea set fossilized in dried mud, portraits on the wall coated with soil, but visible underneath. Everything was still, preserved in midlife. Emma's voice came as a whisper. "It's like they were here yesterday." Sarah couldn't speak. Her throat ached. She stepped forward, each movement stirring centuries of silence. Her beam caught the outline of a stairway, delicate iron railings still gleaming beneath layers of clay. Paintings hung on the wall, men in suits, women in lace dresses, the ghosts of her bloodline staring back. In the study, the discovery waited. The room was large and paneled in dark oak, its furniture mostly intact. Behind the desk, the beam of her light fell on something that made her heart stutter, a large steel safe built into the wall. Its combination dial was untouched, the metal faintly corroded, but still solid. On the desk, beneath a cracked glass paperweight, lay a folded piece of paper. The ink was faded, the handwriting delicate and looping. Sarah lifted it carefully. For whoever finds this house, should it ever breathe again, the combination is yours, as is my last hope. C.A. Her hands trembled as she turned toward the safe. The sound of the dial clicking under her fingers echoed through the still house. She'd never opened one before, but somehow her body knew what to do. She followed the numbers scrawled in that fading ink. Click, click, click. Then, a thud, soft but final. It opened. Inside were stacks of old stock certificates, bound with ribbon and wax. The edges were browned but legible. Names leapt out at her: Carnegie Steel, Southern Railroad, Standard Oil. Her breath caught. She recognized them from the history books she'd once read to Emma at night, stories about empires that had built America. "Are those money?" Emma asked. Sarah swallowed hard. "They were, baby. Maybe they still are." Beneath the papers lay a small leather journal, its edges worn smooth by time. Sarah brushed off the dirt and opened the first page. Cornelius Ashworth, 1924. The words that followed unraveled a story buried as deeply as the house itself, the story of a man on the brink of ruin. Cornelius had once been a railroad tycoon, but as the market collapsed and his empire crumbled, he had converted his last assets into stocks of companies he believed would outlive him. Then, the flood came. The mudslide buried the house, his fortune, and his final chance at redemption. The last page made Sarah's eyes sting. To whoever digs for this, know that I failed, not because I lost everything, but because I stopped trying. May you have the courage I lacked. Tears welled up as she closed the book. The words might as well have been written for her. She reached into her pocket for her phone, her hands shaking. When she called the number on one of the certificates, she half expected laughter, another lawyer's joke. But the voice on the other end didn't laugh. They asked for the serial numbers, requested she wait, then came back breathless. "Miss Coleman, these are still active. They've split and multiplied for nearly a century. Their combined value," a pause, "roughly $15 million. The room spun. She clutched the desk for balance. The words felt unreal. 15 million. She looked at Emma, whose eyes were wide with innocent confusion. "Mama," the girl asked softly, "are we rich?" Sarah crouched, her voice trembling. "Maybe, baby. Maybe we are." But deep down, she already knew this wasn't just about the money. It was about the dirt under her nails, the blisters on her hands, the people who had laughed and the ones who had helped. The money was a miracle, yes, but the digging had been the real redemption. That night, she and Emma slept in the front parlor on old blankets, surrounded by the soft hum of history awakening. The copper roof above them gleamed faintly in the moonlight, seeping through a broken window. Outside, the town buzzed with whispers about wealth, about destiny, about miracles. But inside that buried house, Sarah Coleman finally slept without fear. She had dug through a century of earth and found more than fortune. She had found proof that hope, once buried, could still breathe again. The sun had barely risen when Sarah stood before the mansion again, her reflection faint in the freshly cleaned glass of its tall windows. The excavation was complete, the copper roof gleaming under the light, the carved wooden doors restored. A year ago, it had been a hill of dirt and mockery. Now it was reborn, the Ashworth House Museum. Workers, neighbors, and volunteers moved around the property, carrying paint cans, sanders, and ladders. The air smelled of varnish and sawdust, laughter mixed with the clatter of tools, the sound of a town rebuilding itself. Sarah had hired everyone she could from Ashbury Hollow, men who had been laid off from the mill, single mothers who needed a second job, even teenagers who had once laughed at her, now earned paychecks restoring the house they'd mocked her for digging up. Marcus was hauling lumber from the truck when he called out, "You ever gonna take a break, boss lady?" Sarah smiled faintly. "When this place starts running itself." He chuckled. "Then I guess never." Inside, the mansion was unrecognizable. The grand staircase gleamed. Chandeliers, rescued from beneath layers of earth, shone once again. The study, the room where she had found the safe, was now preserved exactly as it had been, glass protecting the desk and the open journal of Cornelius Ashworth. Beside it, under soft light, sat Sarah's first shovel, rusted and worn, mounted on a wooden plaque. A simple inscription beneath read, "The tool that unearthed a town's future." But despite the excitement around her, Sarah felt uneasy. Wealth had changed her circumstances, yes, but it hadn't erased her worries. Every day, new faces appeared at her door, reporters, financial advisors, distant relatives she'd never met. And then there was Thomas Garrett. He'd been quiet for months, but quiet wasn't safety. Quiet was plotting. It started with whispers at the town meetings, complaints that the museum would ruin the town's character. Then came the sudden delays in her building permits, mysteriously missing paperwork, and complaints about traffic congestion that didn't exist. Sarah saw his hand behind every one of them. But she wasn't the same woman who'd once begged for mercy from bills and landlords. She showed up at every council meeting, head held high, Emma at her side. When Garrett spoke about preserving the peace, Sarah stood and said calmly, "Preserving peace doesn't mean burying truth. We've already done enough of that in this town." The murmurs that followed made Garrett's jaw tighten. His power was slipping, and he knew it. Weeks passed, and the museum neared completion. Sarah had already decided what she wanted it to represent, not just her great-grandfather's fortune, but the stories of the workers who'd built it, the immigrants, the poor, the forgotten. Dr. Monica Wells, a historian from the university, had joined her mission, cataloging every artifact with care. Together, they created exhibits that showed the true cost of old wealth, the lives and sweat buried beneath it. Still, the house seemed to hold its breath, as if not every secret had been uncovered. That feeling proved true one stormy afternoon. The rain came down in sheets, hammering the copper roof, echoing through the halls. The restoration crew had gone home early. Only Sarah, Emma, and Dr. Wells remained, sorting through crates of photographs in the attic. Emma's small voice broke the quiet. "Mama, look at this." She held up a photograph, a sepia image of a woman in a long dress standing beside the same house. But behind her was something odd. The photograph showed the rear wall of the mansion, except the wall was missing a section that didn't exist now. It looked like a door, sealed up. "Where did you find that?" Dr. Wells asked, leaning in. Emma pointed to the back of the photo. "It was in this box. It says, basement, 1858. Sarah frowned. Basement. There's no basement access anymore. It was filled in after the flood. "Or covered," Dr. Wells murmured. Within the hour, they were downstairs, flashlights in hand. The storm outside turned the windows into trembling mirrors. The cellar door groaned as Sarah pried it open. The air was thick, damp, and cold. "This place gives me chills," Emma whispered. The three of them stepped carefully down the creaking stairs, mud still clinging to the walls. Sarah swept her light across the concrete and stopped. One section of the far wall didn't match the rest. The bricks were newer, lighter in color. She reached out and pressed one. It shifted slightly under her palm. Dr. Wells's eyes widened. This was rebuilt, recently, for its time, Probably right before the mudslide. Sarah's heart pounded. Help me move this. With crowbars and bare hands, they worked the bricks loose one by one. Behind them, the wall opened into a narrow, dark passage. The smell that escaped was old, dry earth, age, and something else, something human. Sarah raised her flashlight. The beam illuminated a cramped room, barely large enough for two people to crouch inside. Wooden crates lined the corners, covered in dust. In the center, a candle holder with melted wax still clinging to its base. "Dear God," Dr. Wells whispered. This was a hiding place. Sarah stepped inside, her stomach twisting. The walls bore faint scratches, then words carved into the stone with desperate hands. Samuel, April, 1859. Mary and son, June, 1860. Rebecca, Christmas, 1858. Emma's eyes filled. "Mama, what is this?" Sarah touched the carvings gently. "People," she whispered. "People who were hiding." Dr. Wells knelt beside her, voice reverent. "Sarah, this isn't just a basement. This was part of the Underground Railroad. Your great-great-grandmother, Constance Ashworth, she must have used this place to shelter escaping slaves." The revelation hit Sarah like a wave. The house that had been a symbol of buried greed had also been a sanctuary of courage. Constance, a woman history had forgotten, had risked everything to protect others. They found more rooms behind the wall, narrow tunnels, sleeping pallets, and a trunk filled with journals wrapped in oilcloth. Inside were Constance's own words, written in coded language and trembling script. "He suspects nothing. The walls keep secrets well. Another mother and her boy tonight. We will wait until the train whistle." Then they moved north. Tears blurred Sarah's vision as she read. She used the same house that buried her husband's fortune to save lives. Dr. Wells nodded. "And she never told a soul. If we can authenticate these documents, this will be one of the most important Underground Railroad discoveries in the state." They spent the rest of the evening documenting every inch, careful not to disturb anything. Emma, quiet but focused, helped tag each journal and photo. "People need to see this," she said softly. "Everyone should know." Sarah put an arm around her. "They will, baby. They will." When the rain finally stopped, the three of them emerged from the cellar, soaked in sweat and awe. Outside, lightning still flickered in the distance, illuminating the mansion that had once been forgotten, now alive with truth. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She stood at the window, looking down at the garden, the earth still wet and glistening. For the first time, she realized what her inheritance truly meant. It wasn't just money. It wasn't even just history. It was justice, buried and waiting for someone brave enough to dig. Tomorrow, she would call the newspapers. Tomorrow, the world would know who Constance Ashworth truly was, and what this house had hidden for over a century. Sarah turned off the lamp and whispered into the dark, "We're still digging, Grandma." The morning after the discovery, sunlight filtered through the high windows of the mansion, gilding the dust that still floated in the air. For the first time in years, Sarah awoke without fear. No overdue bills, no eviction notices, no dread of tomorrow. Instead, she felt a quiet, powerful peace, the kind that comes when you finally understand your purpose. Downstairs, workers were already gathering, whispering about the hidden rooms found beneath the house. The news had spread overnight. What began as the buried mansion miracle had become a story about courage, faith, and history. Journalists from across the state were already calling. But Sarah didn't care about headlines. She cared about what the house now represented, truth brought back to light. Emma came running into her room, barefoot, hair messy. "Mama, the newspaper lady's here, and she wants to talk to you about the people who hid in the basement." Sarah smiled, brushing the child's hair gently. "We'll talk to her together. They deserve to be remembered, all of them. By noon, the front lawn of the Ashworth house was alive with voices. Townspeople, volunteers, and visitors stood shoulder to shoulder, looking at the once-buried mansion that had given their town new life. The copper roof shone like fire under the autumn sun. A banner across the entrance read, "Grand Reopening, the Ashworth House Museum." Miss Patricia, dressed in her Sunday best, hugged Sarah tightly before the ceremony. "You did it, girl. You didn't just dig up a house. You dug up the heart of this town." Sarah's throat tightened. "We all did," she said softly. "Every one of us." The crowd applauded as she stepped up to the small stage set before the mansion's steps. Emma stood beside her, clutching her mother's hand. Microphones buzzed, cameras flashed, but when Sarah began to speak, the noise fell away. "2 years ago," she said, voice steady but full of emotion, "people laughed when they saw a desperate woman digging in the dirt. I can't blame them. It sounded impossible. But I wasn't digging for fame or money. I was digging for a chance to believe that my life could still mean something." She paused, looking over the crowd. "What I found wasn't just a house. It was proof that hope doesn't die when it's buried. It waits, sometimes for years, sometimes for generations. All it needs is someone brave enough to pick up a shovel." The applause rolled over her like thunder. Inside the museum, the new exhibit had been completed overnight. Visitors wandered through rooms that told the story of 2 legacies: Cornelius Ashworth, the man who buried his fortune, and Constance Ashworth, the woman who used that same house to save lives. Their journals lay side by side in glass cases, one written in guilt, the other in courage. Dr. Monica Wells guided visitors through the basement, where the hidden chambers were preserved exactly as they had been found. The carved names on the stone walls, Samuel, Mary, Rebecca, glowed softly under the lights. Some visitors wept quietly, others stood in reverent silence. Sarah watched from the doorway, hand on Emma's shoulder. "She was brave," Emma whispered. "Your great-great-grandma. She helped people who were scared." Sarah nodded. "And she taught us something important, that every act of kindness matters, even if no one sees it for 100 years. In the months that followed, the museum transformed the town. Tourists filled the once empty streets. Restaurants reopened. Young people who had left for the city returned to help manage the growing foundation. Sarah made sure every dollar of her inheritance worked for others. Scholarships for students, loans for small businesses, free meals for struggling families. Reporters called her a philanthropist. She preferred neighbor. But not everyone could understand her choices. When a financial consultant from Raleigh asked why she hadn't invested in stocks or luxury homes, Sarah answered simply, "Because money can multiply itself, but hope can multiply people." And it did. By the end of the year, the Coleman Foundation had funded new roofs, new jobs, and new beginnings. The town that had once whispered about that poor woman with a shovel now called her Miss Coleman, the one who built something from nothing. On the anniversary of the house's discovery, they held a celebration called Digging Day. Children brought toy shovels, families baked pies, and the townspeople gathered around the museum's front steps. Sarah stood at the podium once again, her palms rough but steady. "Every one of us has something buried," she said. "A dream, a gift, a chance that everyone else told us wasn't worth the work. But the truth is, nothing worth finding ever lies on the surface." She looked at the smiling faces before her, Marcus, Miss Patricia, Bobby, the church kids, and Emma, who waved shyly from the front row. "So if life tells you to stop digging," Sarah said, "keep going. You never know what's waiting just beneath your feet." The cheers echoed through the hills. That night, long after the crowd had gone, Sarah and Emma sat on the mansion steps, Fireflies glowed over the grass, and the windows of the Ashworth house shone with warm light. "Mama," Emma said softly, "are we rich now?" Sarah smiled. "Yeah," she said, "but not because of money." "Then why?" Sarah looked out at the town, the shops, the lights, the people whose laughter drifted through the night air. "Because we found something that matters more," she said. "We found out who we are." Emma leaned her head against her mother's shoulder. The copper roof above them caught the moonlight like a crown. And in that quiet, Sarah realized the truth her great-grandmother had left behind, that the greatest treasures are never lost, only waiting for someone brave enough to uncover them. Years later, visitors would still come to the Ashworth house to see the miracle of the buried mansion. They'd see the safe that once held $15 million and the tunnels that once hid those who sought freedom. But the most powerful display stood in the main hall, a single rusted shovel in a glass case, its handle worn smooth by human hands. A plaque below it read, "The woman who inherited dirt and found hope for an entire town." And every person who read those words walked away believing the same thing, that somewhere beneath their own doubts and fears, something beautiful was waiting to be unearthed. Sarah Coleman's story reminds us that the greatest treasures aren't made of gold. They're the ones we uncover inside ourselves. If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs a little hope today. And remember, no dream stays buried forever.